Okay, it is 5 o'clock. I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is the July 25th, 2023 Planning Commission for the City of Portland. We have all commissioners present, with Commissioner or Vice Chair Thompson calling in virtually, joining virtually. And our first item is items of interest from commissioners. So I was wondering if there's any DRAC report or anything from Vice Chair Thompson coming out of the PHB Inclusionary Housing Work Group. And Vice Chair Thompson, I see you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, I did just quickly want to share that the Inclusionary Housing Work Group has summarized their recommendations in a letter to City Council, and that was presented this morning at the Housing Production Work Group, which is available by recording, I believe. And so, Julie, maybe that's something that we can include in a follow-up email to the rest of commissioners for folks who are interested. I'm not fully prepared today to share a complete summary of those recommendations, but if that's something that other commissioners are interested in, I could potentially do that at our next Planning Commission meeting.
Yeah, that would be great, Vice Chair Thompson, if you're able to share more of an update at the next meeting. I would certainly appreciate that to stay up to date with that work group. Thank you so much for offering. Great. And Commissioner's feedback, anything coming out of DRAC for update?
Yes, and happy to give an update. Julie has challenged me to figure out how to screen share on this, but I'm going to figure it out. So I've been on DRACT for maybe a half a year, maybe less, so not a long time, but I just want to give a little update, so a little high view of what happens there. This is a group, we get presentations from a whole slew of bureaus, BPS, but also Bureau of Development Services, BES, PBOT, Parks, Water, they're all there, along with people who are working on the ground on projects. And it's used sometimes as a focus group, sometimes as a heads up, here's changes coming along. Sometimes if there's a gnarly issue like shared sewer lines, they'll put together a little subset of DRAC members to help vet the change, to inform the people who are implementing it on the ground. And what's neat for me about it, and it might be of interest to the group, is just how some things we see from that lens, because from that perspective, Title 33 is just one little bit of the things that they play with. There's all these other titles that get adjusted, and they track all this stuff. So I wanted to just show a couple of like examples of like the kind of handouts. Don't expect, I'm not going to dive into this. I'm not competent to do that, frankly, but at least you can see what there is that the city tracks beyond just the land use code. So here's where I'm going to try and go to my Zoom window and share screen. Share screen. Look at that. Each one's a separate screen. Look at that. Okay, let's go to this one here. So this is one thing that can you see that on the screen? Anyone other than me? Oh, look at that. No, that is that is success. Let's just call this meeting off. Okay. So every quarter, I think we get an update from the counter, sort of showing how many projects are coming in. Compared to last year. And if it's red, that means that someone's going to try and take some action on it. So this is what the Bureau uses to manage workload. Because if you have a period of time where there's very few projects coming in for land use initial reviews, then they know, oops, permits might be tanking. We maybe don't need as much staff. So it's like a staff planning tool. And they've got a whole slew of indicators they do. So examples are total building permit applications received. So it's a way of sort of like projecting for planning ahead. I'm going to try and I'll just scroll through this very slowly. So pre-application conferences, early assistance appointments. You can see a lot of red things here, and you look on the left, the change, that means that they've been dropping a lot since the last touch point, which is this hint that maybe there's going to be less development activity going ahead. And so anyway, and whenever there's a change, then there's some parties responsible for trying to attend to it. So it's kind of a good early indicator for making adjustments as needed to the development process. Okay, I'm going to try and switch over to a different one here. This is monthly major workload parameters, where they actually track how many inspections are done, also part of work planning, commercial inspections, residential, case resolved, land use cases that go through the pipes. You can sort of see how much activity is happening. enforcements, numbers of employees, so staffing. So this is also it's like an internal practice, because part of what DRAC is set up to do is help with internal processes, so that you have to understand how the current processes are working or not working. I'll switch to another one here. This is sometimes we get updates on projects like the floodplain management update, which we came through the Planning and Sustainability Commission, so we got the same briefing. So sometimes we get briefed on the same stuff the Planning Commission does. And this one, I think the briefing was a little bit more focused on the, it's probably the same briefing, but a little more attention on the building code piece of it, like displacement of water in floodplain events. This is a really neat table here. This is a big table.
We're not actually seeing that.
You're not seeing it? Okay, because I moved too fast. Let's see if this one, I'm going to let this one dwell. So there's a inter-bureau code change project list that captures a whole slew of projects, the code modification projects the city is doing. And it names who's leading it, who the reviewers are, and where it is in the process, like 1 to 5. So we're used to land use projects, and they're on here. So you can see everything from like the fossil fuel code project, sorry Tom, it's been on there for 7 years, right? To projects that haven't even come to the Planning and Sustainability Commission yet, or Planning Commission yet. But also you have projects like the, I guess it's not showing up at all on this one. I'll just say orally, it's the, like a building code change to make it easier to convert office buildings to residential. I mean, I'm not sure it'll happen, but there's dozens of projects on here, and you can sort of see what all the different bureaus are working on. Forestry would be on here, BDS, all that stuff. And maybe that's, since especially this is not sharing, I'm not going to try and share, but Julie's going to put this stuff, just as like a snapshot. I don't expect to do this much, but if you want to know like what's happening in that commission, or if you have things you want to give feedback. So actually there's one, can we get there's one called the Regulatory Work Group Recommendations, which I'm going to take 1 second to try and actually get this one to share, because this is worth us all seeing. Because it affects, get that a moment. There we go, look at that. So this is a permanent improvement process, which really has a lot to do with land use decisions. And I'm not sure what motivated the project to happen, but it's certainly influenced by some projects that have come through the PSC, where we were like inclusionary housing. We had to make a vote on that, and we didn't really know how the Housing Bureau was going to implement their portion of it when we had to make a vote. Shelter to housing continuum, it came to us, and then as it was going, BES was trying to figure out how they implement their parts of it, because they have parts to implement too. It's happened on, I think one of the projects, well, the E-Zones project the Willamette River, where we did the land use, but there's all the building code issue. So the attempt of this project is to try and get the decisions by other affected bureaus to do their homework first, so that when it comes in front of a review body, whether it's Planning Commission or directly to City Council, they know all the impacts. We don't discover them later in the process. So it's trying to identify, you might have an idea, the city might change a zoning, but actually it impacts the way sewer lines run through, something like that. They're trying to get their head around those issues that get impacted by code change early and make that available to the decision makers on that project, rather than let that come up sort of after it's in front of City Council. And so there's other elements to this. I'm not doing a service to describe it. I'm not going to do any more, but there's a nice process to try and systematize projects that impact multiple bureaus to get the information up earlier. And I will leave it at that. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you so much, Commissioner Spivak. That was super informational, and I look forward to future updates about the intersections between our commissions. Next up is a director's report. Patricia, if you have one for us today.
Sure. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, good evening, Commissioners. Patricia Diefenderfer, Chief Planner, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, for the record. So just a couple of quick things. I just actually wanted to kind of reinforce something that Vice Chair Thompson mentioned today. So today there was a 2-hour work session with the City Council on housing related issues, and just to give you a little bit of a sense of what was covered in that work session. And I think Julie, you'll be sharing perhaps a link to the video that you could see the work session. But the agenda for that work session and what we covered as staff was basically a few different components. One was setting the foundation, understanding of what our housing needs are in the city, and that speaks to the housing needs analysis that this commission will be seeing in the fall. So we gave kind of a preview of some of those findings there. And we talked about some of the things that the city does to influence housing development. So, of course, regulations, having updating codes with zoning code regulations, building code regulations, all those things impact development. So there's some things that are within the sphere of influence of the city, and then there's obviously a lot of things that impact housing development that are outside of the city's control. So we kind of had a conversation about that. We talked about the current conditions, the current market challenges, and things that are, of course, more macroeconomic issues like inflation, interest rates, the cost of land, cost of labor and supplies, et cetera. And then we talked about some of the things that we've recently done as a city, some things that are underway currently, and some future actions that the city might take to help facilitate housing production. And so the IH calibration study was one of the studies that was featured as some future potential code amendments to inclusionary housing that would help calibrate the inclusionary housing requirements so that they're not, creating any kind of a barrier to developing housing in the future. And so I'm not going to summarize the findings here either, but there were some findings, and I think those will be topics of conversation for this commission in the future. But we just wanted you to know that did occur, and that it was a very good conversation. It was an opportunity for the commissioners to kind of get briefed and ask questions and kind of spotlight the things that are going to be important going forward as it relates to housing. So just wanted to share that. And then also just on a slightly another note, we were discussing here that yesterday there was an event for the Jim Pepper House in the Park Rose neighborhood, which was a historic designated monument. Sorry, I'm just looking at my notes here. I apologize. So we've actually had 2 BPS-sponsored nominations to the National Register of Historic Places recently that are notable and significant. The Jim Pepper House in the Park Rose neighborhood and the Dr. John Marshall Building on North Williams Avenue. The Jim Pepper House is now the first contemporary Indigenous place in Oregon to be recognized in the register, and the Dr. Marshall Building, the first Black Panther site in the country to be recognized in the register. So those are significant for those reasons. The nominations were prepared by our Historic Resources Program at BPS at the request of property owners and with the active federal support of Congressman Blumenauer's office. Now that the properties are listed as National Register landmarks, they are subject to the demolition review protections that are codified in the Historic Resource Overlay Zone. So that's just some information for you as well. And I think that concludes the report for today.
Thank you, and congratulations to everyone involved on those historic nominations and the inclusion. I've been through that process for one of our buildings at Central City Concern, and it is significant, and those are significant acknowledgments for our city. So thank you so much, Patricia. Next up is our consent agenda, and we are approving the minutes from our last meeting, June 27th, 2023. And remind me, because it's been a little while, do we do roll or do we do? Oh, there we go. Do I have someone to make a motion, please?
I would love to make a motion, this is Steph Routh.
Commissioner Routh, and a second? Oh, you don't.
I second the motion, Commissioner Council.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Aye. And it passes. Okay, so next up we have a training on economic development. We have BPS staff here joining us, both virtually and in person. So welcome. We'll transition now to that portion of the agenda.
All right, good evening. I'm Tom Armstrong. I'm a supervising planner. I manage the Housing and Economic Policy team. With me tonight online is Sam Brookham, who's an economic planner. And then we also have Steve Kuntz, who's a senior economic planner on our team. He's away at a family wedding this week, so was unable to join us tonight, but you will see a lot of him in the future as we bring the economic opportunities analysis to you in 2024. Let me. I'm going to share my screen. There we go. Okay, I'm going to, for tonight, I'm going to give you an overview of the comprehensive plan goals and policies that are in Chapter 6 that really get to Portland's economy. Interspersed in there, I'm going to talk a little bit about recent economic and employment trends. And then I'm going to close tonight with a sort of overview of what is an economic opportunities analysis, the EOA, what goes into it, and what you'll be seeing as we update it in 2024. And that update we're working on right now. Some of the technical reports, we're going to be starting a collaborative work group process here in September, but it'll give you an idea of what some of those elements are. So just a reminder, you've seen this diagram before, but the economic opportunities analysis is a supporting document, a background document to the comprehensive plan. It gets adopted. It's recommended by the Planning Commission, adopted by Council. It's incorporated in the comprehensive plan. It builds off of the information in the buildable lands inventory, which is also a background document as well. And then, those analyses support the goals and policies in the comprehensive plan. So some key takeaways up front for you to think about as we get through this information. One, especially pre-pandemic, Portland was experiencing robust economic growth. We've been a little bit slow to recover, although and the job data lags a bit, but we're starting to see signs that in 2022 that recovery was picking up steam. I would say over the last business cycle, which we really think of from the Great Recession in 2008 to the peak 2019 pre-pandemic, we saw a lot of job growth. Most of that was in high-wage jobs, and so you'll hear a lot tonight about middle-wage jobs and low-wage jobs, and the importance of middle-wage jobs, especially with people without college degrees. And providing that sort of economic opportunity, upward mobility, ability to afford Portland in terms of housing costs and that sort of thing. And to that point, we'll dig a little deeper into what it means for BIPOC workers and some studies we've done that have shown that they have higher incomes in the industrial and office sectors compared to other sectors in the city. We'll get a little into the industrial land supply and how it's tight, getting tighter, why discussions about Portland's economic development always sort of come back to the industrial areas, to the Portland Harbor, to the Columbia Corridor, and then where we'll leave off and what we really need to dive into as part of the EOA is this challenge of how do we create middle wage opportunities in Portland, in other sectors beyond the industrial area in Portland to provide that economic opportunity in the future. So, and I think please feel free to ask questions as we go along. This is the only thing on the agenda tonight. And so I don't have really pauses in here to take questions. So just let me know if you have a question and want to talk about something. There we go.
For the record, Wade Lang. I practiced that for a week. I'm just curious, and since they go ahead and ask, I was writing it down to ask later, but you talk about industrial expansion, land expansion and stuff, and primarily job creation and middle income jobs. Is there any data that shows what level of employment is being had through industrial type jobs? Is that declining over time?
Not in this presentation, but we do have other information and we can link to and send. It's been really interesting that it's sort of been maintaining over time. Some trends that we have seen are that the manufacturing job density has been going down primarily due to automation, but the manufacturing businesses, and so it's been a little bit of a overall stable employment, maybe a little bit of job loss. Meanwhile, especially over the last business cycle, we've seen a lot of warehouse and distribution development. Portland is literally at a crossroads. We have the port access, we have 2 railroads, 2 interstates. We have like 70% of the warehouse and distribution employment that's in the region. So it's a real sort of economic strength for us. We've seen the job density in those warehouses go up as the business practices have changed. And it's not just sort of Amazon delivery jobs, but across the whole warehouse sector. It's no longer big warehouses filled full of stuff with a few workers. That just-in-time inventory stuff turnover, it's resulted in sort of higher employment densities. And so what we've seen losing in manufacturing has been made up in that warehouse and distribution job density.
I had, and it's not so much a question, but in one of your bullet points with the reference to BIPOC workers having higher incomes, as you go through that, I'm very interested in what it's being compared to, where they had been previously, compared to other sectors, compared to other groups. So, I mean, higher incomes could mean a growth in income, but still disparity. I just want to sort of understand it as you go through it. So I just wanted to point that out before we go any further. Thank you.
And we have a slide.
I'm sorry, Michael Alexander for the record.
There we go.
Thank you, Patricia. I saw the evil.
We have a slide on that in here that we can start to get into. Unfortunately, Steve is the real expert in all of that, but we can link. We already do have a background report on that we can provide the link to and more information on that. Okay, just in general, we have 3 broad economic development goals in the comp plan, and these really sort of speak to the 3 components that you'll see here as all of these policies fit together. One has to do with prosperity, and that's more really about the workers and the people who work here, and it's important to keep in mind sort of we are in a regional job market, and Portland is a regional job center. And so it's something like only 60% of Portlanders work in Portland. The other 40% go somewhere else in the region to work. And the flip side is true. Only 60% of Portland workers live in Portland. The rest come from outside. So there's a lot of regional movement, commuting around. But what we're really focused on is sort of what's Portland's role in that prosperity equation, and sort of providing those job opportunities. And goal 6B is about development, and again, this gets to the sort of the land use planning aspect of it. Well, what is our role? Our role is to provide a land base for those jobs to be located and those businesses to be located in. And that's really what, as you'll see, what we get into is, and this relates to the 3rd goal about business district vitality, is each type of business sector has a little bit of a different need. The central city is different from neighborhood business districts, which are different from the industrial areas. And so we have a set of policies, as you'll see, and we get down into some of the specific needs of each type of business district, and particularly with a focus on what is that land base, what do we have existing, what do we have room to grow, and those are some of the key issues that we address in the EOA. So again, the first set of policies, again, we've sort of breaking these out in bundles. Up front, it is a lot about planning for growth, planning for an expanding economy. Policy 6.3, employment growth, really sets, I talked a little bit about this when I was here talking about housing policy. That sets a job capture rate of about 25% of the regional job growth. We far exceeded that from the last business cycle. We've been in a job loss through the pandemic, and we're just starting to recover those jobs. But we do set policies that we expect employment and business and the economy to grow, and that we have other things that speak to our competitive advantages. What are our strengths? That's not only just assets such as the ports and the interstates, but also the workforce that is here, and especially these two competitive advantages in small business development. This is where we begin to line up with Prosper Portland and the Advanced Portland development strategy, which is really the shorter term look. They are like, what are we going to do for the next 5 years? What programs do we need to support our economic structure? And they use a phrase, targeted industries. What are the clusters that are already here in Portland where we have a lot of activity and that we can grow, and they really focus on that. And then we in the economic opportunities analysis are taking that longer range look, that 20-year look, and we sync those up in terms of how can they be mutually supportive over both the short term.
I'm really sorry to interrupt you. Your audio sounded really great until about 2 minutes ago, and it could just be virtually that it's not coming through as clearly, but it's super duper faint. So I don't know if something changed on the audio side, but I'm having a hard time hearing now.
Okay. We'll see what they can do. Can you hear now better?
A little bit. It's still much fainter. It was super loud and crystal clear for most of your presentation so far, and it just got quiet a little bit ago.
Okay. Moving on to the next couple of bundles of policies. Again, these have to do with land development and our land supply. One of the things that you'll see as we get into these policy discussions is about brownfield redevelopment. We have a lot of brownfields, especially in our industrial area, especially in the Portland Harbor Superfund. That's underutilized capacity that we essentially, if we figure out how to clean it up, mitigate it, reuse it, it unlocks that capacity and makes it available. This is a policy that's been on the books for a while. We haven't been able to really figure out how to get that cleanup going in a very robust way. Some of that is dependent on the Superfund liability working its way through the EPA, and some of it is locally, and the city. The one tool that the city has when it comes to that is a property tax exemption. We need the county's cooperation on that to be able to offer those types of incentives. The other thing that you'll hear about is the traded sector. And again, the clusters or the targeted industries, our role as a trade and freight hub. the importance of traded sectors are that it really is what brings income into the region. Why the products that are made here that are sold elsewhere, that generates the income that comes into the region. Then it gets circulated through sort of the local services and goods and services, and some of that then leaks out into goods that are not made here, like food or gasoline or other products. But it's that traded sector that brings those outside dollars circulated that, there we go, that support the local businesses here. And so we do have a set of policies around being competitive, growing our traded sectors, growing the clusters, the such as the advanced metals manufacturing that sell products outside the region that bring the income into the region. We also have a suite of policies around the equitable household prosperity, and this really gets into what we call income self-sufficiency, which I'll dive into here next. We talk about, and we've looked at job opportunities for people who live in East Portland, and both sort of looking at the commute. A lot of them commute up into the Columbia Corridor, south into Clackamas County, to our hospitals. Some commute to the central city. We look at those clusters. We think about how can we both make better transportation connections to access those jobs, but also what can we do to promote job growth in East Portland itself and provide more quality jobs. And all of this is sort of in the name of reducing income disparities, and which we'll get into here and see. So income self-sufficiency, this is a relatively new standard that has emerged in the last 15 years or so. The work has been maintained in this region by Work Systems, Inc., which is the workforce development nonprofit agency that coordinates all of the training programs throughout the region. But the idea is, what does a household need to meet their daily living expenses and in Multnomah County? So it looks at Multnomah County costs, housing, food, insurance, all of that, all of those household living expenses. And it looks at it for different types of household configurations. And it makes, as you can see here, the different incomes levels that are needed if you're a single adult versus if you're a family with 2 school-age children. I will say that this work was done back in 2021. It has not been updated to account for the new Preschool for All program, that, a big chunk of the costs and why we highlight sort of families with preschoolers is that daycare cost and the burden that places on families. But this really gives you a sense of the income needed to really meet all of your daily living expenses in Multnomah County. And it's way higher than, say, the federal poverty rate, which I think is $14,000 or something like that. And so this is a better benchmark of how are people doing. And we incorporated that into the Portland plan. It's a benchmark measure. We set a very ambitious goal of 90% of Portlanders are income self-sufficient. Back when we set that in 2012, at that time, 77% of Portlanders were income self-sufficient. Since then, as of 2017, when we last updated this analysis, that number had dropped to 66%. And I think that's what you showed and what what we saw in the data is household costs going up, and wages not really tracking with those costs. Since the pandemic and with the inflation, we've seen wages increase. So again, the next time they do this analysis, it'll be really interesting to see all of the different policy actions, all of the differences, the structural differences in the economy and how this plays out. But this really shows you here, at least in 2017, the real difference it makes between having a low wage job and a middle wage job, and your ability to be self-sufficient, sustain yourself in Multnomah County. And again, we break this down by different household types, whether you're a single adult or a four-person family, and really try and look at those different situations. Yes, Deb.
This is the first time I've heard self-sufficient. I've heard living, and I've heard thriving, and I'm curious how, what are the criteria differences that you see between these?
I think they all sort of get at the same issue. I don't really, it sort of all depends on whose study it is and how they've defined it. And I think we've sort of, again, starting with the Portland plan, have really settled on this income self-sufficiency, and we have WorkSystem Inc. as a partner that helps keep that data fresh. And so that's mainly why we've relied upon that measure. I think they all speak to the same sort of thing. Do you have enough income to cover the cost of living in Portland, in Multnomah County? The other challenge we have, especially with sort of the economic and the employment data like this, is it really gets reported at the county level and not down to the city level. But we can roughly say that Portland's about 85% of Multnomah County, so it's a pretty good proxy for what's going on in Portland. So then digging. Yeah.
Quick question, Commissioner Patel, for the record. Going back to that slide, how up to date is this data? I see 2017 as the latest.
Yeah, this particular slide is from 2017. We could update it for the 2021 numbers. We're in this sort of weird spot here with data lags and the pandemic disruption and sort of recovery going on, and sort of trying to get past that pandemic disruption to figure out, well, what we're starting to get now data from 2022 that sort of begins to give us an idea of what's going on with the recovery and what sort of the new normal is going to be. Right. And so we need to go back as that data becomes available, update some of these charts and analyses.
Thanks for that. Do you anticipate the data to reveal a continued stagnation of wages?
I think we've seen wages increase, and in some indicators they've been increasing more than inflation has. Yeah. And so, maybe there's been some progress made there. I think we'll just see how it plays out.
Okay. Thank you.
It's a murky picture right now. But that said, it doesn't, we don't expect to see large swings, right? It's incremental increases or decreases for them. Yes. Yeah. All right. So this one begins to get at the racial income disparities and how they have persisted over time. And this is from 2021 data. So this is the most recent data that we have in terms of household income. And it really shows that, how much of a struggle many of our BIPOC households, especially Black Portlanders and Native American Portlanders, have in that income disparity, and that these numbers really haven't budged over the last 10 years in terms of making that progress. And so this is why, as we begin to look at the economic policies, thinking about, how to create that economic opportunity for BIPOC Portlanders, and whether it's providing jobs, job training, education, and that's where, it's going to take sort of a multi-pronged policy approach that is training and education and access to jobs that don't require a college degree or high levels of training, to be able to begin to move these bars further along, to balance out these income disparities.
Question, Mike
Yeah.
Alexander for the record. The comparison between Portland and the metro area, is that tri-county area or is it some other designation? What geography?
I believe it is the 7-county metropolitan statistical area. So that includes Washington, Clackamas, Clark, Yamhill County, parts of Skamania County, Columbia County. So it's the larger metro region. That said, the 3-county, 4-county region of Multnomah, Clark, Washington, Clackamas make up probably 80% of that core area.
It's interesting to point out the impact that the geography has on African American and indigenous populations. The closer you are to Portland, the greater the disparity.
Yeah.
Clearly.
All right, here's another sort of, one of the things that's driving sort of the income inequality that we're seeing, especially now. This is Portland households, and this is how we've changed from 2010 to 2021, and just the number, almost 80,000 households earning more than $100,000 moving into Portland. And so again, as you look and begin to see the squeeze that puts on the lower income households and even those middle income households, that 50 to 100,000, those two bars there, they're really struggling to find their place in Portland. And sort of that's a combination of sort of the types of jobs that we have been growing, we're growing, that are more of the office type jobs that require a college degree, the software jobs, and just a function. And again, these are households. So some of these people are working out in Washington County at Intel and all of that. And so again, it's back to that. What's happening in Portland and what's happening in the region, and how do those two interact with each other? But it just shows the sort of the upward pressure that this puts on costs, on competition for housing. That as you have more income in your pocket, these people are bidding up the cost of housing and wherever they choose to live. That it just shows the need, again, for sort of supporting those middle income households with middle wage jobs.
Chair O'Mara, for the record, on this graphic, we see a decline in two of the lower income categories. I know there's been analysis about where these folks are going, right? Can you sort of just high level explain BPS and any analysis you've done here to look at geographically where are lower income households moving in our region?
Yeah, we've mostly looked at sort of the internal Portland migration from the inner neighborhoods to East Portland, and then we do see some of that, within the region, going to Gresham and the Rockwood area and Clackamas County, where they are finding more affordable housing options, but then also outside the region. And we're sort of Portland focused, so it's like, oh, we know we're losing them. We're less concerned about where they're going, but what can we do to retain them? And whether that's around affordable housing or better job opportunities, that's really been our focus. Yeah.
Eli Spivak for the record. I have a hard time interpreting this chart because another way to interpret this is everybody's getting raises. So that's not the story that the High Line says is happening, and I don't think it's really happening. So anyway, it's hard for me to understand this one.
We don't think that that's what's happening.
Right.
Everybody's getting raises, or inflation is bumping everybody up to the next bar on the chart.
Right.
We think it is largely in migration of new households getting high-paying jobs coming to Portland, and that has, great. We're growing a lot of high-wage jobs, but it does have these spillover effects, knock-on effects.
Yeah, I can't quite imagine I said what exactly the axes are to show increased income inequality, but I think there probably is a set of axes that would show it. So maybe for another round, I can't quite tell from this. Thanks.
Yeah, Commissioner Routh, for the record. Similarly, I feel like I have so many questions about this one. Where are the data sets that one may peruse that have gone into this, if one were to want to read a white paper?
Okay. Yeah, we can provide, we have a background trends report for the economic opportunities analysis that we'll provide a copy to you for, that you can begin to dig into a lot of these charts. You will also see some of this data, and we can bring this back for the housing needs analysis that you'll see in September. And that is more focused on what's going on with Portland households and sort of the housing struggle, and less about the economy. So,
because a few things that bring to mind with this is also, what is the relationship of remote work, where it might not necessarily accrue specifically to job growth in this region, but that remote work has allowed for that to be different. Is this, to what extent do we see housed to houseless in this? And I know that there's a lot of those data sets, particularly related to point in time counts, are really variable. Also, I think of, related to the previous slide around different ethnicities, races of, we look at income, but how does that translate to wealth and year over year? And how is housing insecurity and community insecurity on different levels? So those are just some things that are popping into my head as questions.
Yeah, we can dig more into that as part of the housing needs analysis work. All right, so, and again, sort of, and one of the reasons why I think it is that household income chart is more about jobs than is this data, which is for the region, and this was the sort of that last business cycle, and it's also reflected in the national data and just how much high wage jobs we were growing in the region and in Portland, and low wage jobs and very few jobs in the middle, and just that contributing to that wage disparity, the income disparity, just by virtue of our economy and what a squeeze that puts on those middle income households. And so what we begin to look at are those middle wage jobs. What are those opportunities? And what you see here is what this is how sort of jobs in Portland sort of break out, and what you see in the upper right are jobs that and the axis along the bottom are the share of workers that have bachelor degrees in these fields. And so to the right, you begin to see those fields have 60 to 80% of the people working in those fields have at least a bachelor's degree. And to, you know, some don't, some make it, but for the most part, you really need a 4-year college degree to be in those professions. And then what you see in the left are the employment occupations that don't really require a college degree. Maybe I have a degree, but I'm a construction worker anyway, or I'm in manufacturing, and so what we then begin to look at is that band, you know, and this is again from 2019, that band of jobs that pay you sort of $34,000 to $60,000 a year. That's that sweet spot there. Sort of the middle wage jobs without college degrees, and that's where you begin to see the construction jobs, the manufacturing jobs, some of the transportation and warehouse jobs, the office support jobs, healthcare support is in there. Those are sort of that good living wage, middle wage jobs that you can begin to have that self-sufficient wage.
Can I just do truth test one of these? This would suggest that 20% of attorneys, architects, and engineers don't have college degrees. Is that, if 80% do you think that potentially is a bug or maybe they do?
Maybe they do. I mean, it again, you know, the employment data is broader categories. It just, and it's noisy data. We see a lot of variation in it. A lot of it is self-reported data. So maybe I didn't check that box on the census form. Businesses, you know, change people who are reporting the data. So, yeah. I think it's still the larger point that, yeah, most of you need a college degree to be in those professions. So, building off of that, this begins to look at, this is a study we did looking at occupations of Black and BIPOC households and how their income varied depending on sort of what broad sector they worked in. And what this is showing is that in the middle there, those two columns that for the most part, and this is true of white households as well, or white workers, is that the office and the production, manufacturing, distribution sectors in general offered higher wages than retail consumer services, and even, especially for BIPOC and Black workers, healthcare and education. And so it really shows where sort of that upward mobility, economic opportunity lies, is in sort of the industrial sectors and the office sectors. And I think that begins to tie back, again, sort of some of Prosper Portland work in their Advanced Portland strategy that focuses on downtown recovery and supporting especially our manufacturing businesses in the industrial areas, to sort of get those sectors going again, because that's where the better paying jobs, the higher incomes are.
Mike Alexander for the record. Typically, throughout my life, I've never done well with charts like this. I mean, they just pull me in the wrong direction. But I want to make sure I understand it. The impact or the metric that's being targeted here is not so much the amount of wages as the change, the shift in wages by sector compared. I mean, so I can't
Right. So
intuit anything here in terms of comparative earning income from these metrics. It's
it is, in some ways, it's internal. Black worker, the way, if you look at the production and distribution, the gray box in the middle,
right.
And so what that is saying is black workers in manufacturing and distribution make about 25% more than black workers in other fields, in retail services or compared to the sort of average black worker. That's where they're making more money.
But it's agnostic as to the comparison between black workers and white workers
Correct.
in that same sector.
I believe so.
It twists my thinking. I have to say it.
And in our, in the study that we've done here, we also go one step further, which is a very confusing graph. It doesn't work well on PowerPoint, but we break it down by race and education level, and you can begin to see again, this sort of chart plays out across all education levels. In terms of black workers with college degrees still earn more money in manufacturing compared to other black workers. So we'll link to that particular part of that study as well to highlight that.
Chair O'Mara, for the record, can you extrapolate on office services? Is that any profession that's based in so would it include banking, insurance, finance?
Attorneys.
When I see that, I think administrative support
Yes.
almost.
Yes.
And so, but really we're talking about professions that are traditionally based in an office. So that's a wide range of
Yes.
professional services, essentially.
Yes.
Okay.
But it does, and we'll get into this, it does include sort of that back office administrative, the claims processor, the call center. Those are good jobs. And it does include that. And frankly, that's where we have room to grow. We've got a lot of office space. We could grow a lot more office space. So there is and this chart shows that there are economic opportunities if you have the office space, you have the training programs, you can get the workers in, and you have the business recruitment support to grow those businesses, that's sort of, what's our strength.
And I'll see if I'm getting this right. The production and distribution also captures a huge, like, people making things, Amazon delivery drivers, construction workers, all in that hat. Okay.
Yep. All right. A little bit more. Now we'll get into some geography. I talked about this a little bit before. Business districts. We approach the city in sort of 4 broad categories here. We think about the central city and what's going on, largely in office sector. We look at the industrial and employment districts, our campus institutions, our hospitals and colleges. They provide a strong economic base, lots of jobs, lots of good jobs there. And then our neighborhood business districts. We're pretty fortunate that, when we look at those broad sectors, we have a pretty balanced economy in Portland. You know, we're not overly dependent on one specific sector or the other, you know, which gives us a pretty good economic foundation to build from. And so how that plays out on the map are these employment geographies. And so you see in the middle, the central city, you know, both sides of the river, including the central east side. Then in red, you see our various neighborhood business districts. The gray areas, especially along the river, the rivers, the Columbia Corridor, the Portland Harbor are industrial areas. You see some industrial areas scattered about. We have the Brooklyn Yards down in southeast Portland, some areas along I-84 and I-205 are zoned for more industrial employment uses. And then in purple, you see the scattered campus institutions, the hospitals, the colleges throughout Portland. And as I said before, each of those has sort of a unique need, a land need. They have a different development pattern. And so when we get into the buildable land inventory part of the EOA, we look at what's going on in each of those areas to begin to understand sort of how is it developing, what space is available, what could be available. Here's another way to think about it, that at the same time, each of these areas is not uniform. That you have office jobs in the industrial areas. You have industrial jobs in the neighborhood commercial business districts. I think, you know, an example is like in the Woodstock neighborhood, the Joinery Furniture Company used to have they used to manufacture furniture right there in the middle of Woodstock. You have auto repair businesses. You have different assembly businesses that fall more in that manufacturing industrial category. But you can see on I'm looking mainly at the bar chart on the right, the retail consumer services category. You can see that, you know, most of the retail consumer service jobs are located either in blue, the central city, or red, our neighborhood commercial districts. You have McDonald's in the industrial areas and sandwich shops and banking in the industrial areas, but for the predominant character fall in those two categories. Likewise, you can see healthcare, education. Most of those are in these campus institutions, but you know, really about half our healthcare jobs are outside our main hospital campuses. They're in the clinics in the neighborhoods and in downtown. And you know, again, under, you know, the office sectors, you can see here most of those are in the central city. We have corporate headquarters like Daimler on Swan Island. You know, you have admin, bookkeeping jobs that are associated with manufacturing businesses out in the industrial areas. I will also note that across the top, you see the little yellow bands, and those bands are getting thicker. And one of the things that we have seen is in our residential areas, which are really the white spaces on the map, we've seen a lot more employment growth, home-based businesses, people working from home in those residential areas. And that's where those begin to show up. And so, again, sort of looking forward, how do we nurture those businesses? How do we support them in a way that's appropriate for a residential area, but begin to look at, you know, how can we grow that part of our economy? And we've seen other programs in other areas that actually can be an equity strategy, is to how we can support those home-based businesses. You don't have to go rent space. You can grow your business in a space that you're already renting or owning.
Hey, Tom, I have
Erica,
a quick
yeah.
question before we move on from that
Yeah.
last slide. I don't know if this is the most appropriate place to bring this up or not, but I'm just curious, thinking ahead to the EOA and the way that this sort of data factors into our land use planning, what to make of the work from home trends that we've seen as a result of the pandemic. And some of those may have been temporary and some of them may be longer lived, but you mentioned remote work and seeing more activity happening in residential areas. And so I'm just curious, from a big picture standpoint, what to make of some of these trends. If we looked at the office sector, Central City bar for 2023, for example, like what would that look like? Would there be a huge drop off there? What other kinds of trends would we start to notice, and what does that mean for our planning efforts?
Yeah, a couple of different things. I think the Central City is a challenge for, like I work from home half the time. So where do I count my job? Is that counted in the Central City or is that counted at home? We tend to count those jobs that are sort of associated with where the business is located, right? A business, the city, is renting space for me to work Central City most of the time. So that's a Central City job. There are other, as you say, there are other businesses where I'm just working from home and I don't rent space anywhere else. My business may even be registered at my home, kind of thing, or somewhere else in Cupertino or wherever, right? And that's more of a business or a job that is located in these residential areas. I will say it is really hard to track the person that is working for a business that is not located in Portland, is not paying even Portland or Oregon taxes, and they're off working for a company that is in some other state and they're just logging in. They're here. We're not really counting them or capturing them in a very good way at this point. And that's one of the difficulties with this sort of work from home. And we sort of are left with, well, where is that business? Who's paying those payroll taxes? Where does that paycheck generate from? And that's sort of where your job is located. What we are and looking at and what we're speaking to, and especially in the Central City and how that plays out in the EOA, is like, well, the demand for office space is going to be lower going forward. And so, and the more jobs we see in the residential areas, the less demand for space there will be in other parts of the city, whether that's retail space in our neighborhood business districts or office space in the Central City. We'll just see less demand. That said, it's I forget exactly, it's probably 10, maybe 20% of the growth at most. So it's a marginal difference, but it's not this huge swing that is really changing our growth patterns yet. Did that get to your question, Erica?
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Okay. So let's dive a little deeper into the industrial and employment districts. Portland has been a leader in sort of preserving our industrial land base. Starting in the 1980s, we created what we called industrial sanctuaries. And really, what you see across the country with industrial areas is the competition and conflict with other types of uses, with housing and retail, which can outcompete industrial businesses on a rent basis, or housing, much in the way that Oregon protected its farmland and forest land from adjacent residents that complain about the noise and the smells and everything. We've done a similar thing with our industrial areas and really created these industrial sanctuaries. They're for industrial businesses. We've really limited the amount of, especially like standalone office or standalone retail, and really tried to preserve that base. And it really is about pricing and the ability, the rent that a retail business can pay a higher rent than an industrial business, and trying to, tilt the market to say, no, this area is for industrial. That said, we have had conversions. We have Cascade Station out by the airport, where IKEA is. That used to be industrial land. We purposely, intentionally converted that to get light rail to the airport. South Waterfront was an industrial area. That upper reach of the river became less viable, less feasible for today's sort of riverfront industrial uses, and we intentionally said, no, we want to grow a healthcare center there and Central City residential there. So we have made compromises or conversions to that industrial land base. But for the most part, we still have upwards of 14,000 acres of industrial land in the city of Portland. As you could see in that pie chart of the jobs, we still have a good 25% of our jobs are in sort of that industrial sector. As part of the 2035 comp plan update, we built on some metro policies, and we have this new designation, which is prime industrial land. Like, this is the best. This has access to the port. It has access to rail. It has access to the freight system. And so this really is that Portland Harbor, Columbia Corridor out by the airport. It shows up on Metro's maps as regionally significant industrial areas. It has the utilities, it has the natural gas system and the water pressure. And so what we've done there is we've sort of really also tightened up what uses can go in there, non-industrial uses can go in there. We've also prohibited individual property owners coming in and asking for a map change to something other than industrial. That once you're in that prime industrial land category, it's only up to us, the city, through council, can change that to something else. So we've really raised the bar on that level of protection for the prime industrial area. Again, you see brownfield redevelopment. This is where we have our fossil fuel distribution policy that really has governed some of the work that we've done on fossil fuel zoning. So we have, again, it's a suite of policies that are specific to the industrial area. Yes, Erica?
I was wondering if any of the policies address concepts of ecological value or resilience or human health within industrial zones. I mean, I feel like the way that we typically, or at least the way that I kind of frame this in my head just by default, is that, these are like the dirty zones where you've got pollution and truck traffic, but they provide this benefit that you pointed out of higher wage jobs and economic development. Does it have to be an either or? Like, are there ways that the policies look at just the sheer land area that's dedicated to some of these uses, and how that land area is typically positioned on ecologically sensitive or sites with a lot of potential, on waterways? And so I'm just trying to understand like how those things intersect and if that's addressed head on in any of the policies.
Yes and no. Within Chapter 6 and within this bundle of industrial district policies, there are a couple of policies that speak to ecosystem services and the river and the values that provides. But one of the things when we set up the comp plan, the 2035 comp plan, and we rewrote the whole thing, is we intentionally set up these different chapters that you've been going through as sort of silos or standalone chapters that really just address the economy or housing or the environment and watershed health. And that really what it comes down to, and under Oregon's planning system, is that when you go to make a decision, a land use decision, you have to balance compliance with one policy versus the other. And we have those inherent conflicts embedded in the policy document, but we haven't tried to resolve all of them in every situation in the comp plan, but made it a situational decision where you as the Planning Commission and then eventually council has to weigh and balance and prioritize these policies and mitigate the impacts across the different policy silos in the context of that decision. And otherwise, we would go over to the watershed health and talk about the importance of the river industrial, and you just start crisscrossing, and the comp plan would be twice as thick as it is today. And so we sort of made that intentional decision to try and not have each chapter speak to everywhere that it could cross-reference to. That said, it does show up here now and then. There are freight policies in the economic chapter that also cross-reference to the transportation chapter. And it does show up from time to time, but for the most part, that balancing and those decisions about what to prioritize are part of that actual in-the-moment policy decision. And those are some of the issues that we'll get to as part of the EOA to begin to reconcile that competition that is occurring along the river, along the Columbia Slough, for those different values, whether it's for the economy or for the environment. So again, back to sort of some of the middle wage data and what's going on. Again, this is a little bit old, but it sort of makes the point that our industrial and mixed employment, light industrial areas that you see on the left, how up to, what is that, 55% of the jobs are sort of falling in that middle wage category. Whereas you see in our mixed-use centers in the central city, you get more of that U-shaped wage distribution. There are still some, up to a third of the jobs in those areas are middle wage jobs. And so we need to, as we get into the future economic growth, we just need to be mindful of where those opportunities are. And as you can see in this next slide, and again, these are two charts from the current EOA based on the 2035 comp plan that was adopted. Sort of where we have room to grow and what sort of opportunity in terms of high wage, middle wage, low wage jobs. That what this is showing is that we have lots of room to grow in the neighborhood commercial districts, lots of room to grow in the central city. And again, back to this slide, that gives you a different sort of wage profile like you see here on the right, that is that U-shaped, lots of high wage opportunity and more on the lower end, low wage opportunity. And sort of the industrial districts and the mixed employment districts, we have that tighter land supply. And, especially what you see there at that at-risk category is really what we've seen in the central east side. the planned conversion of and of industrial space, converting to more of those the office warehouse conversion to office space is eroding that industrial district supply there, and so when these we at least from a zoning standpoint, we have more of a challenge in the industrial districts. Creating middle wage jobs in the central city or neighborhood commercial districts is more about workforce training, small business development, sort of that becomes more Work Systems Inc. and Prosper's responsibility. We've done little tweaks with the zoning code, like when we rewrote the mixed-use commercial zoning code that applies in the neighborhood commercial area. We allow up to 10,000 square feet of light manufacturing, assembly. You know, I think of you know, people building bicycles or assembling electronic component parts. You know, we've created some opportunity for that. It's how can we get businesses to take advantage of that, and can they compete for rent for space?
Eli Spivak for the record. This is making me think of all the things I don't know, because I've never read the last EOA. It was 2016. Is that
Yes.
right? Okay. And so that's going through my head, is that what kind of document is this? Like, did it contain an assessment of what the situation and recommendations for things to do,
Yes.
as this one will? So,
Yes.
okay, in that case, it would be splendid, because I don't know this one, to know what recommendations were made in 2016, and did we do them? Like, what did something you tried didn't pan out? Like, I just know some sort of a look back to what was when good brains thought of it back then. And if we tried a strategy for 7 years and it hasn't changed anything, that'd be good to know as we look at this one. Thanks.
Yeah. And, you know, I'll just say, you know, some of the highlights, like, again, creating industrial capacity. That's where we changed the zoning on the Broadmoor Golf Course. And the front half that fronts Columbia Boulevard is now a warehouse development, and the backside is being, the open space is being developed as a wetland mitigation bank. That was one of the actions that really, that got realized. One of the action was, you know, offer a brownfield tax abatement program. Well, we tried real hard. We didn't realize that with the county back in 2019. We haven't come back to that issue yet. So, you know, that'll probably be on this to-do list kind of thing. We're still waiting for Superfund to be realized kind of thing. So, but yeah, you know, and I don't have a good slide in here of that, but, you know, there are sort of three main components that you will see for. One is what we call the trends report, which is the look back of how have we been developing, what are the jobs we've seen, what's the changes in employment, all of that. We produced that report back in the spring of 2022, so that report is available. The core components are an employment forecast and a buildable land update of the buildable land inventory that really takes into account all of the development that has occurred in the last 7-8 years, and changes in development trends. You know, are we increasing in intensity or density, and incorporate that. And then the fourth piece really is this reconciliation and this strategy of, okay, we're going to make these policy choices about land supply, and here's another a whole list of things of, you know, how we make this all work, how we comply with all of these policies across all of the chapters. You know, is like, hey, we have a lot of capacity. How do we boost middle wage jobs in the central city or a neighborhood commercial district? We need to go develop these 4 programs, and that sort of becomes the action plan for realizing all of those assumptions that go into that. And great transition to sort of what we're tackling in the EOA update. We're gonna take it out from 2035 to 2045, and this really is the state requirement under statewide planning goal 9. You'll hear reference to is how do we demonstrate to the state that we have basically a 20-year land supply to accommodate what we expect is future economic growth. That's the basic requirement of the state. We get a lot of latitude within there to determine what that economic vision is for Portland. What are our strengths? How we can, what we expect to grow, what the opportunities are. It builds off of the Advanced Portland work. It builds off some of the regional work. The second goal is, again, what we talked about today is, addressing the policies and looking at inclusive prosperity and how do we reduce the BIPOC income disparities, and where are those opportunities, and back to, especially when it comes to land and zoning and development capacity, how are our decisions about development capacity promoting the inclusive prosperity, and or what other programs do we need to support that growth? Again, if we have a lot of room to grow in the central city, how can we make that growth more inclusive? What kind of programs do we need? And then, as Erica was getting at, and back to the industrial areas, we know we have a lot of competition for land in the industrial areas, land along our river and the Columbia Slough, and so we need to reconcile or balance different policy goals around economic growth, industrial growth, and watershed health protection, and that has to do with floodplains in the North Reach along the Willamette River, and wetland and riparian area protections along the Columbia Slough. And we'll, as part of that EOA, we'll bring forward sort of, different scenarios that look at, if you provide this much industrial growth, you can get this much watershed health protection. If you optimize for watershed health protection, this is what it means in terms of industrial growth capacity, and begin to look at those trade-offs and try and figure out where is that sweet spot that sort of achieves all of these objectives in that area where they all sort of come together. Ultimately, we wind up with a table like this, this is what got adopted in the 2016 EOA. What you see in the first column on the left is the job forecast and how that breaks out by the different larger geographies. We break it down a little bit smaller than that in some other tables, but at this level for this presentation, there on the far left, you see the four broad geographies: the central city, the industrial areas, the neighborhood commercial areas, and institutions. We leave out sort of the residential area because we don't really have to plan for land in those residential areas, but you'll see that pop up as well. But then you see the job growth forecast, and we take those jobs and we do a conversion factor, so each job, for each office job, each retail job, each industrial job needs so much building space. Each so much building space converts to so many acres of land zoned for that type of use. And then, so that is the demand side of the equation. And then in the middle there, you see the supply. And that was our buildable land inventory. We went through, we identified vacant land, we identified land that we thought was redevelopable, and we tally all that up, and we think we have capacity to grow a lot, to grow this much. And then on the right, you see what we call the reconciliation. So what is our surplus of capacity in each of those geographies? And this is where you begin to see that we have a lot of capacity. We can grow up in the central city. We can grow up in our neighborhood commercial areas. We can grow up. As part of the 2016 EOA, we did a whole zoning code rewrite for our campus institutions to make it easier for them to go up. And that created a lot of capacity. We did some measures along, a little bit of industrial capacity, but you can see that 111 acres is we were back then thinly balanced, and in fact, at the time, the strategy in the document was we were going to make progress on brownfield remediation and freight investments, and that as we made a progress on that we would be able to do some of the watershed health E-zone expansions and protections. That strategy really didn't work out, and now we're facing federal mandates with FEMA and the floodplain and the Endangered Species Act and the salmon habitat along the slough. We have to make more the harder decisions and do the actual balancing and deciding how much growth capacity and how much watershed protection we're going to do, and sort of do both in this next EOA.
For the record, Wade Lang. Do you try to maintain a certain level of surplus at all times? Is there like a magic number there that you always are kind of eyeing?
Not necessarily, but so this lack of a larger industrial surplus is what has prevented us from proceeding with E-zone protections in the slough, because the E-zone protections are, hundreds of acres that would throw us into a deficit that we are not allowed to do under Goal 9 with the state. And so if we were to make those changes and a business group didn't like that, it would be easily appealable and overturned at the state level. And so we need to go through the careful policy balancing and justification to sort of do that change and account for it in our EOA, in our economic vision, to bring those two in balance, to be able to show that well, this is how we expect to grow, and that's a reasonable assumption, and here's all that capacity, and it also allows to do all of these environmental protections as well.
Eli Spivak for the record. So if this table were done at a metro level, though, I imagine it'd be pretty different, because I guess the question is industrial land supply, the fact that we just we do the city of Portland geography, is that required for regulatory review, but in some ways a weird way to do it? Because really, if you're looking to decide industrial site, you don't look in the city of Portland, you look in the region. And so that's one question, is this done regionally, and would that make more sense? And the other question is the Goal 9 question you raised. Is it such that if you reduce one, I thought you described earlier a balancing act with respect to our comp plan. Is there not some sort of balancing act with respect to state land use goals, where you can hurt a little bit of one to gain a lot in another one, in other words? Because you just suggested that we would not fare well in that legal challenge, but based on the comp plan, it sounds like you can do little trade-offs between goals when it's evaluated against those criteria. Yeah.
I'll take that last question first. This is why we haven't been able to do it, because we would, in order to make those harder decisions, do what we more than 111 acres of protection, we have to go back and look at the job forecast and rethink what kind of economy are we going to have in 2045, and begin. We're getting to the point where, you know, especially when it comes to industrial capacity, we're basically built out. We're getting to be full. So now what does that mean for economic growth in Portland? And so that redoing the EOA allows us to make those decisions and say, you know, in some ways at the regional level, you know, it's this big bottom number, 140,000 jobs. It's like, you know, show that you can make that bottom line total, and City of Portland, you get to decide how those jobs get allocated between these 4 geographies. So we can say, you know, look, this is what we have capacity to grow in terms of industrial jobs, and here's how we're going to achieve that. But that's our limit, especially when we bring in these other policy goals, such as statewide Goal 5 or Metro Title 3 and 13, right? We have to do it all, and this is how we're going to balance that. But we have to basically do that at the same time, and which requires us updating the EOA. And that's sort of been the heavy lift, and why it's taken so much time is we have to have all of these things in alignment. I think that got to your first. What was the first?
The first question was just like, if you looked at this for a region, is industrial land
Right,
only
so-
have a tiny surplus?
Yeah.
I'm guessing it has a much bigger surplus, but I don't know.
Again, I think this speaks more to the flaws of Goal 9, and you know, a lot of that was set up in the 70s and 80s, and a lot of it is geared to work for everywhere else outside the metro region, because the assumption in Goal 9 is when you run out of industrial land capacity, you go expand the UGB and you add more industrial land and you keep going. Well, in Portland, we can't do that, right? We don't. We're basically landlocked, but yet when you get to Metro and Metro's regional UGB decision making, they are looking at more of a regional level, but they don't. In their words, we're not required to look at Goal 9, and so they don't get even to this level. And even now, with how difficult it is to not legally just expand the UGB, but to plan the infrastructure and the transportation network and all of that, that it is more incumbent upon a city to take that on. And Metro just doesn't bring in an area like Damascus and say, all right, you guys go figure it out. They want a local partner to come and say, hey, we're ready to go. We want to plan this expansion, which is why you tend to see Hillsborough, Wilsonville, Tualatin be the ones that are sort of are organized enough and are planning those expansion areas, and so that's where that happens. I think we do this industrial land shortage is not just a Portland thing, it's a regional thing. It has regional implications on even the warehouse and distribution. If it's not going in Portland and it's not going in the region, it's going in Ridgefield and Woodburn and Salem, and then the trucks are going up and down I-5 to bring it back to the region. And you know, if that's an impact we want to accept, then that's the way it's going to play out on the landscape. If we continue to grow as a region in the demand for goods and moving goods around, and it's not just bringing goods into the region, it's taking them out as well. And that's what I have for you this evening as a foundation. And I will send out this the links to the 2016 EOA and this trends report, and particularly highlight some of the prosperity income inequality research that we've done that you can dig deeper. And we will be back again probably in 2024 to really dig deeper into the EOA and some of these issues. And you will see some of this. We are launching a collaborative working group of stakeholders in September to work through each of these issues before we put it all together in a report that comes to you. And so that they're going to be a sounding board for us, to similar to the questions that we got tonight, to really refine and zero in on the key issues, and so that'll be sort of the first screen of all of this information before it shows up to you.
Michael Pouncil for the record here. Thanks, Tom. I wanted to ask a question about, you had said earlier that we had a pretty substantial industrial, like our industrial area, our sanctuary is pretty large, fairly large in the country. I think I'd read that it's one of the largest in the country. Do you?
Could be.
Yeah,
I don't
okay.
know.
Well, I was just wondering.
Probably one of the strongest in the country in
Okay.
terms of an individual property owner deciding to convert to a non-industrial use.
Okay.
I would think we have some of the strongest industrial protections out there.
And you had said earlier that that we are basically we're full. That
We're getting there.
We're getting there. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I was just wondering if there was any data, if you had any information on cities that are our size who have like had this problem or who have had less. How did they tackle this situation of not being able to expand? I was just wondering if there was any information or data on that at all.
There is a little bit, and we have some of it in the trends report that I can highlight for you. I will say it depends on your sort of what policy you're optimizing for. Some of these, it depends on if you're looking at the city or the region. You look at a city like Seattle, they are, it looks more like the central city, right? The wage polarization in the city of Seattle, and you're having middle income earners are having to travel longer commutes outside the city to the region to find those opportunities. Or a place like Austin, Texas, they just keep expanding out into the prairie and provide those. But again, they have room to go and expand and further out. I don't know that maybe Patricia, you can speak to LA. I don't know that, especially on the West Coast, that there is a city that has done this particularly well.
Okay, all right.
Patricia Diefenhofer for the record. Sorry, I would just say that I think what Tom is saying is correct. Oregon has some of the strongest protections. Other cities, they solve for the problem by sprawling more, or they just opt to convert their industrial land, and there's implications for these disparities that we were talking about, the lack of middle wage jobs, or you institute programs to try to account for and grow middle wage jobs in other sectors, which is one of the things that Tom was talking about, and which is one of the things that potentially we have to seriously look at through this upcoming EOA, because the industrial land is constrained. So there's no like magic bullet or easy solution, and it's very true what Tom said. It just depends on what cities are trying to optimize and what their sort of policy priorities are. And I think the city of Portland has many very strong policy priorities. Environmental protections, but also protecting industrial land and ensuring the opportunity for middle wage jobs. And so we really have, I think we have a challenge ahead of us to figure out how how to do that and how to think about how we can grow middle wage jobs in other sectors through workforce development, job training, through small business assistance and other ways, because we can't grow more land. So
Could you put back the EOA project goals slide in part so I don't have to look at myself while I
Sure.
talk? Great, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, I've been. I know that we have a scoped relationship to this conversation, and also, I just think of all of there's so many, as you're saying, Patricia, that there are so many put-ins, there's so many factors that go in into so many of these outcomes. And I'm currently reading Cast by Isabel Wilkerson, and I think of, thank you, the one before. Yeah. We're talking about inclusive prosperity and just all of the ways that we have through wage theft, through land theft, over the course of years, of decades, that we are talking about income here and we are talking about wages. But I mean, there's also the aspect of wealth. And I think that how does that come in? And, the related to that we've seen a loss of Black home ownership over the last decade, which factors, like from 2008 and beyond. How does that factor into resilience and retention through the last 3 years that we have experienced grave disparities? And a lot of these data sets that we're looking at, it's like, I think it's going to take us time to understand, what just happened and how do we know, and what are the conversations we need to have. Recently we were having conversations around heat islands. And our last difficult conversation where we were previewing the economic opportunity analysis, we were talking about oversized trees. And as we are talking about heat islands, we are talking about increasing heats in industrial areas where people are working. How does that impact workforce, workplace? You know what I'm trying to say. I'm losing words. But workplace experience. Thank you. And how are we looking at climate action? We're looking at how are we dealing with fossil fuels and moving forward our climate action plan. And we're also talking about climate mitigation around heat islands, tree canopy. So I also think, when we're looking at competitive traded sectors, I was just down in Swan Island earlier this week as they were gearing up for strike readiness of Teamsters part-time workers, who have variable wages. So I guess I think of all of, and that hate crimes have increased over the last 2 years, how that relates. I live in Lents, in the Jade District, how that has impacted small businesses in the area, particularly that are BIPOC owned. So and please drink water. Tom, you've been doing this for an hour and a half. I feel like that there's a lot swirling, in each graph. I was like, what is this actually talking about? And what is the totality of all of our social inputs and environmental and economic inputs that go into this one graph? And how do we pick apart what the conversation should be and how we should be approaching that conversation? That was a lot. Thank you very much. Okay, goodbye.
I would agree. There's a lot here. It's very complex. It's hard to tease out really what's going on. I will offer two things. Is one, much in the way that that Prosper Portland does 5-year strategies. We have a policy to update the EOA every 5 to 7 years, sort of on that business cycle. Business cycles tend to be 5 to 10 years. We're a little bit behind with this one. So we can make mid-course corrections between now and 2045 is my point. And that we can think about what's going on. We're in this early recovery phase that's going to make it even more complicated. But I think we need to also just focus on some key policy decisions, like floodplain protections in the river, the Columbia Slough, tree mitigation, tree planting requirements in the heavy industrial area, and really sort of focus on those and then continue to monitor and see what's happening as our economy changes, as we emerge, with all of the new federal investments and we know that, the forecast is going to be inaccurate. And so we need to make these mid-course corrections. And so we sort of run with our best available information right now and how we think the world works and revisit those assumptions every couple of years.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Tom. Any additional comments or questions from the commission? Yeah, that was a lot. Thank you so much. Okay, we will adjourn today's meeting. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.